give a special thanks to the organizing committee for inviting me to such kind of August gathering. I'm honored to deliver the keynote speech there. And basically today I like to talk about technology-driven supply chain management in the post-pandemic era. And basically you understand that pandemic gave us a different flavor. So now we have to think how we can incorporate this COVID, post-pandemic COVID experience in our research and in our supply chain management. Today, basically, I like to talk about the very pertinent issue in the management social science, that is supply chain management. So let us start our session. I like to, at first, I like to clarify that what is supply chain management? That means that it is the one chain that will start from supply and finish to the customer end. So there, when you think that any kind of basic supply chain, there are three basic entities: raw material, finished product, and as raw materials come from supply end, after the processing, finished products will deliver to the customer end, and then there is a three flow of goods for manufacturing industry, flow of information, and flow of fund. We can apply this supply chain management concept in the manufacturing industry as well as service industry. And when you like to apply this one in the service industry, that time we use the term flow of service instead of the flow of goods. It is very interesting thing is that this supply chain management concept is we can apply in the engineering area as well as the business area. So that is one of the milestone is that you can see in the professional field, and a lot of research has been done by as well as from the engineering sector as well as from the business sector by this supply chain management. So what I said, three basic entities. Now we like to apply these three basic entities, basic supply chain for the manufacturing industry. If you look very carefully, you can see this one, what I just now mentioned. Raw materials come from supply end, after the processing finished product will deliver to the customer end. And then you can see a manufacturer, distributor, retailer. It will be available or not. It depends on the size of the production capacity, size of the business. Say if it is a large-scale business operations, at that time we can see this one: supplier, manufacturer, distributor, retailer, and customer. If it's a medium-sized business operations, that time we can see only supplier, manufacturer, retailer, and customer. It's very small production capacity, any business, that time we can see the supply chain will be supplier, manufacturer, and customer. And definitely a flow of goods, flow of information, and flow of fund from the supply to customer. So that is our supply chain. What I said earlier, the chain that will start from supply and finish to the customer end, or from raw materials to finished product. Now we can apply this supply chain for the service industry as well. If you apply this one in the service industry, then you can see this one: raw materials to come from supply end, after the processing, finished product delivered to the customer end. And then you can see there is a service provider, as it is service industry. It is very interesting thing is that if you look very carefully, but there is a consumer in the service industry. A manufacturing industry supply chain management and service industry supply chain management, there is a key issue, key difference. That is that in service industry, our one of the target is that how can you contribute to the society contribution. On the other hand, manufacturing industry supply chain, our main target, improving the business operations, better outcomes, and how we can do some of the outsourcing, better transactions, something like that. But in service industry, our main target, how we can contribute to the society contribution. So if you look very carefully here, you can see this one. This is our basic supply chain for the service industry. Just now I mentioned that we can apply this supply chain management concept in the manufacturing industry as well as in the service industry. In the manufacturing industry, the example is the vegetable supply chain management, poultry industry supply chain management, fishing industry supply chain management, RMG supply chain management, textile industry supply chain management. On the other hand, we can apply this concept in the service industry as well, like hospital supply chain management, educational supply chain management, tourism supply chain management. So it means that we can apply this this social science, this concept for any industry, whatever the manufacturing, whatever the service industry. This is a definition of supply chain manager. I don't want to talk too much because we have a time constraint. But when you think that any supply chain, we should think about a few things like facilities, functional activities. This is some of the facilities which are relevant to the supply chain management, like warehouse, factory, distribution center, retail outlets, and a back of office. Some of the functional activities which is very important for supply chain management: forecasting, purchasing, inventory, quality assurance, scheduling, production, and customer service. So what I said earlier, if you think the whole supply chain from supply to customer, we should think this kind of functional activities within the supply chain. Suppose I just give the one example: supply and demand. Suddenly on product demand is very high, so you need the more forecasting. So that time we can use this concept of forecasting technique we have to apply. Okay, so now if you see this one, evolution timeline of supply chain management, historical perspective of supply chain management. If you see this one, that the supply chain management, they started their journey by the name of the logistic management in 1950s, and it has been started their journey in the defense military. Still, you know that many companies, many organizations, many countries, still they're using the term the logistic management instead of the supply chain management. Supply chain management officially matured in 1970s, officially matured. And officially, logistic management matured. Supply chain management, they started journey officially in 1980s. So that is one of the milestones in supply chain management area. And after the launching supply chain management concept in 1980s, then most of the research in the manufacturing industry in supply chain management. By the way, you can see the red color is a reference from where we collect this information. And then supply chain management, they have started the research in the service industry 1995. If you look very carefully, supply chain management officially started their journey in 1980s, so around 45 years. And service industry, they started the journey in 1985, so around the 30 years. Still is new. And that's why you can add a lot of options, a lot of innovation there. Our pandemic, we noticed 2022 onward. So we can understand that the supply chain manager, they never face this kind of pandemic impact. That's why today we are going to discuss what is the impact of the supply chain management based on the pandemic. And there's another milestone, education supply chain management. It is one of the service industry supply chain management, which is developed by Professor Lau in 2007. But he did this research, education supply chain management, based on the City University of Hong Kong. And 2009, ACSE model developed. There's the integrated tertiary education supply chain management model. This is another supply chain management model. This is another supply chain management model for the tertiary education institutions. And if you look very carefully, the historical perspective that the supply chain management in the manufacturing industry, I already mentioned, about 85% research supply chain management in the manufacturing industry. Only 15% research supply chain management in the service industry. I like to request that young scholars, those are participating in this conference, I believe that a lot of scientists are young scientists there. So when you are planning for the research or PhD research, you may think about the supply chain management concept. It's a new, and how we can apply this on manufacturing or maybe service industry. Now, some of the example, supply chain management in the manufacturing industry, you can see the RMG sector, the fishing industry, textile industry, some of the example. I don't really discuss too much. The supply chain management fishing industry, the supply chain management textile industry, this is supply chain management performance measurement in the manufacturing industry. And this is supply chain management in the service industry, what I mentioned earlier. This is tourism supply chain management. This is education supply chain management. It's very interesting that we can apply the supply chain management in the service industry, particularly hospital, tourism, educational sector. And that is a model I mentioned just now, ITESA model, Integrated Tertiary Educational Supply Chain Management Model. So by this one, you can understand supply chain management you can apply in any industry if you want. Now, so I have done my first part, that what is supply chain, why you have to need this kind of concept. Now, let us start the COVID-19 impact with the supply chain. You know, our COVID-19, they started their journey in the 2020 January from the China, and it moved to all over the world. And we remember that this COVID-19 has revealed the fragility of the modern supply chain management. And from the pandemic experience, we have observed that diversified sourcing is very important, diversifying supplier, and digitalization instead of the analog paperwork. So these two key issues we have learned from the pandemic. I'll discuss a little bit details about these two things. And initially, we assumed that our supply chain is very strong, but we understood no. We understood our supply chain, existing supply chain is a fragile supply chain. So now we have to think how can resilient supply chain management. We noticed that our disruption, supply chain disruption. You remember that we noticed the supply chain disruption the first time we noticed during the pandemic time. And second time we noticed supply chain disruption in the Russia-Ukraine war. And third time we noticed supply chain disruption Middle East war. So if you look very carefully, we noticed that disruption a few times. Pandemic time, and Russia-Ukraine war and the Middle East war, we noticed this kind of disruption. A lot of ship, they changed their route. A lot of supply chain transportation mode has been changed due to this supply chain disruption. This disruption is applicable for the factories, storehouses, and delivery channels. And not only that, this disruption, supply chain disruption, you can see rural farm level, even there where the people are not getting the fair price due to the pandemic time. I already mentioned the three area supply chain disruption notice: port, production in factories, and transportation. I'd like to give the two examples from the supply chain disruption. One is that Apple, the main supplier, Western Corporation, it is situated in the China. And during the pandemic time, during the lockdown time, you understand the Apple manufacturing has been stopped due to the lockdown. And then, after the situation, then Apple, they're thinking, they're keeping their eyes to the like India, Vietnam, Mexico. So they're moving from the China to India, Vietnam, Mexico. It is not like the replacement. They have to keep the like China as well as in addition to that India, Vietnam, Mexico. There's another one, Samsung, their mother company in the South Korea. And again, the same situation during the lockdown time, they understood that they have to keep the other few option. And now they're thinking to diversify their smartphone production to Vietnam and India, so different continent, so that they can manage that even the lockdown time, any kind of disruption they have to absorb. We call it resilient supply chain. So what is our suggestion? From academic perspective, research perspective, this is one of the suggestions is that micro supply chain. We have to move to the micro supply chain instead of the macro supply chain. So we have to move to the micro supply chain instead of the macro supply chain. We have to think about the finite, decentralized, agile, mini operating models. We have to think that strategize, buy where you make where you sell. So it means that suppose Malaysia, Johor Bahru, it is close to Singapore. When the Singapore is locked down, Johor Bahru is locked down during the pandemic time. And say suppose factory in the Johor Bahru, but raw materials come from the Penang. Unfortunately, they could not bring the raw materials from there. And again, if you look very carefully, Singapore is good condition, so there is no lockdown in the Johor Bahru. Again, the Penang was a lockdown, so they could not transfer the raw materials from there. So that's why we focus about this one, micro supply chain instead of the macro supply chain. So buy where you make where you sell. And secondly, supply diversification. We have to think of the dual sourcing, double sourcing, or multiple suppliers, maybe first tier supplier, second tier supplier, third tier supplier. So, okay, first tier supplier will come from the China, second tier the local. So we're also thinking the local supplier, so they can continue the whole operation. And third one is the supply chain strategize. We have to think from the short term to the long term strategy. Every 6 months, we have to revise our supply chain strategy. Okay, so we'll take that in a few minutes. Now, come to the point of how we can reshape our future. So our reshape future means we have to think that production home. We have to go to the automation, small batch production. And that is my main discussion, technology. So let us start to think how we can apply the technology there. Rapid wholesale digitalization, we have to move. And in that sense, after the pandemic, our whole research area has been changed in the supply chain management area. Nowadays, we are thinking the managing factory during the pandemic, during the disruption, any kind of supply chain any transport disruption, how can you manage? Any kind of disruption, FMCG, how can you manage? Global supply chain disruption, how can you manage? And the integrated port management system, how can you manage? I like to request young scholars, scientists. Some of the key issues I mentioned here, if you want, you can check this one also for your better understanding. Apply selection methodology, purchasing technique, how can you apply this one? Integrated digital port management system, how can you apply this one? And supply chain disruption in the academia. Service industry also change. 10 years before, we never think that we will deliver the lecture online. Nowadays, we are delivering the lecture online. Even I am delivering the lecture keynote speech today in the online. Earlier it was the physical. So it is happening due to that experience from the pandemic. So not only that, in hospital supply chain management, if you think this one, you never think that a patient will not go to the hospital, but they can take the advice from the doctor. It is possible nowadays. We are going to the telemedicine, other things, technology advancement in supply chain management. So our reshaping the future means we have to think how can I apply advanced technology like artificial intelligence, machine learning, automation, Industry Revolution 4.0, 5.0. How can I apply the Internet of Things, blockchain, big data in our whole supply chain? I'd like to give a few examples, just one or two examples. You see, if you apply the technology, earlier when you send the truck, we have to call the truck like the 10 years before. Nowadays, you have the GPS system, Internet of Things. So we can track the truck. What is the truck now? So that means advanced technological advancement is there. So now we have to think how we can make sure that digitalized, the buyer-supplier relationship. And it is our target to create the smart, agile, industry-driven, resilient supply chain with maintain the ecosystems so that we can manage our supply chain disruption. Now you can ask me that if we apply the technology in supply chain management, then what could be impact will be from there? First of all, improve the supply chain communication. Do you remember earlier I mentioned flow of information from the supplier to customer? Now you can think they improve the supply chain communication. And secondly, greater efficiency in the supply chain process. We can apply by the technology advancement. And third one, the transparent supply chain management. Transparency, so we can enhance the visibility of supply chain management by the technology advancement. I don't want to spend more time now. We can apply the cloud computing, machine learning, robotic process automation. If you apply the automation, automatically the productivity will be increased. And if you, what I said earlier, IoT, Internet of Things, if we can apply, we can track the vehicles. Even now it is in the deep sea, there is a ship we can track. By this kind of Internet of Things. So artificial intelligence, technology advancement, if we can apply, automatically the whole supply chain will be changed. The scenario will be changed. We cannot ignore the human. The human must be there, but machine will help you. Technology help you to get the better supply chain management, transparent supply chain management. And that's all from my side. Now I'd like to open the floor for the Q&A. If you have any question, feel free to ask me.
Thank you for excellent presentation, Dr. Mamun. I do have one question. In your view, how can emerging economies leverage technology-driven supply chain models to build a sort of resilience and sustainability post-pandemic, especially? And considering when digital infrastructure and funding in our region remains very limited?
Very good question. Thank you so much. This very interesting thing is that, yes, we know the setup installment is a high cost. But when you can set up this one, then your productivity will increase, your delay will be reduced, transportation cost will reduce. Ultimately, you can get the benefit, you can get the profit from there. So yes, this is the one challenge is that setup, initial cost, particularly where we are thinking about the cost minimization. But ultimate target will be different. And in terms of business, in terms of operations, in terms of the visibility, transparency, and you can mention one thing is that if you can apply the technology, all stakeholders will be benefited. Even the customer, it is not necessary for them to go to the superstore. They can track if they have the user and ID, they can track that what is the product availability is not available or not. So ultimately, that our whole transparency, efficiency will be improved if you could manage the setup or the installment of the technology in the supply chain.
Thank you.
I hope you.
Yeah. Yes. I just want to extend this question a little bit further. That the supply chain it really becoming increasingly digital and automated, as you explained during your presentation. So, how do you think that the organization ensure human expertise and ethical decision making it remains central to managing disruption and maintaining trust in global operations when everything goes virtual?
Thank you so much. I like to give you a special thanks for this correction. This is now the on debate. I would say the research debate that human interaction with the machine, whether we can move to the 100% automation, or we can ignore the human, or we can keep the both human and automation. I personally, what is my understanding from my research works, I understood this one. we should ignore the human resource. But if you ignore the human resource, there is a huge possibility of the losing the job. So is another unemployment issue will be there, and it will create I would say that the disturbance in the society. So the human must be there. We have to ensure the training of the human resource to work with the technology. A human will lead, technology give the support. Or you can say the different way, human will be the behind of the machine control and everything will be the based on the human. Now come to the next question, what you said, that ethical driven thinking. Yes, even in the research, you know that earlier we used the targeting software. So the similarities we can find. But now when we use the generative AI tools, we understood that even the targeting software similarity index is below 20%. But AI indexing is a 70%, 80%, 90%. Issue is the ethical driven. So maybe we have to come up with more research on that, how you can incorporate this kind of ethical issues within the artificial intelligence, within the AI.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mamun. Do we have more questions from chat or from the attendees for Dr. Mamun?
Let me just mention one thing. If you have any further question, you can see my email address is there. Dear participant, you send the email. I just mention that emerging scientist conference. You'll get the reply. Maybe you can send the question to the conference organizer. They'll forward to me. You'll get my support.
Perfect. One more thing, Dr. Mamun, before we wrap up your presentation. You have an excellent experience guiding countless students and researchers with your profile as good enough experience within academia. So what key advice, as I see that there are a lot of students that are joining us yesterday and today as well, what key advice would you offer to young scientists within the same field striving to build a sort of impactful career in evolving technology-driven landscapes for global supply chain management?
Yeah, thank you. Before giving this answer, I like to request that you should take the pictures of some pictures of of this event, and you can share with me. So I'll also publish in the social media, or also in the university. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So what you asked me, the very basic question, I think I used a few times. Young scientist, young scholar. Research is a continuous process, and there is no limit of the research, and there is no quality of research. It's a continuous process. How can you improve? What you did the 5 years before, what will happen after 5 years is totally different. And you have to need that kind of mindset. If you ask me what I am doing, what I did, if I publish any publication, even it is that Taylor Francis publication, even it is a Springer Nature, but after the publication, I do not want to see again. Because if I like to explore my previous research, I could get a lot of limitation. So better to look forward, moving forward. So I like to request the young scholar, just keep in mind what you are now in terms of research, think how can you improve. So now you can ask me, Professor, what you can do. You have to involve the more international conference. This kind of conference create the avenue for you. This kind of conference give you the platform for you to get the more knowledge, to the brainstorming, thinking. Today, did you notice I mentioned a few key issues? So this is the way that you can think, which issues do you want to accept, and how can you move to the next level?